Hey everyone, Jared James here, and welcome to this episode of Today with Jared James. A very special episode because we're going to talk about a podcast that was done by the New York Times reporter Debra Kamin. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correctly or not, but if I'm saying it incorrectly and it's inaccurate, that would probably fit what happens so much on this podcast. And so I want to address a lot of those things. We're going to do a lot of that today. I'm joined by producer Tom. Tom, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
There you go. I'm not sure how much talking we're going to do just because I'm going to kind of get to this and just I thought today's episode was important. You know, I put out a thing on Instagram and just said, hey, you know, is this something you guys want me to address? If so, comment yes below, and we got thousands of yeses. So I'm like, all right, maybe we need to address this, because I think that when you have somebody who is the reporter for the real estate portion of the New York Times, you expect them to be accurate. You expect them to be honest. You expect them to really promote or root for the industry that they're supposed to be working for, you know, a place that, you know, it's crazy. I used to say a place that's so trusted and whatever, like the New York Times, but I don't even think that's true anymore. I think if I said that, people would start to laugh. So it's not that shocking. But I think there's some points that were made that absolutely need to be addressed. I'm straight back from just about everywhere all over the world, the other side of the world, and so still adjusting to time zones and all of that stuff, so that's a lot of fun. And I was going to skip doing a podcast this week, but I think this is an important one. I think this is something where, you know, whether they're legitimate or not, they have reach, meaning the New York Times, and, you know, if we don't answer these questions, if we don't answer the misinformation that comes out, well, then it just kind of comes off as if it's accurate. So I actually listened to the podcast in a lounge in Switzerland and just made notes. And we're going to talk about those notes today as far as like what was said. And I couldn't hit every single one because it was literally like almost every sentence was just nonsense. And but the ones that I thought were important, I took those down, and I will be talking about those today specifically. But again, we literally could have just done a play, stop, like after every single sentence. You know, it almost seemed like it was satire. It was that ridiculous, okay? And so I'm at the point where with this particular person, you know, she's come out several times with just things that are anti the real estate industry, that are just not true, made statements that weren't true. I'm at the point I don't know how she has a job when this isn't just somebody. Look, podcasts are prevalent right now. Like they're all over the place, and they, you know, you can give your opinions. But this isn't just some, you know, like I like to watch a lot of podcasts with these comedians and stuff. They're giving opinions. They're saying ridiculous things. That's what you love about it. This is a reporter for the real estate section of the New York Times making inaccurate statements about the settlement, about our industry, about the people in our industry. And I don't know how you keep a job doing that. It makes absolutely no sense to me, okay, other than she works at the New York Times. So I guess it does make sense to me. So as it was, I started listening to the podcast, and it was her and another gentleman who does the podcast for the New York Times. And right off the bat, they continually keep saying realtors. And anybody in this industry knows that as soon as you hear somebody say realtor, they don't know this industry at all, because that's not how you say it. It's realtor. It's not realtor. There is no A in there. And yet this is the person representing real estate within that industry. She goes on to say in this interview, let's just get right into it, guys. She goes on to say that on this podcast, they're going to talk about the settlement and how it hasn't lived up to its promise to be earth-shattering and a landmark settlement. And it's going to be the greatest change since the New Deal. And the crazy thing is that she says how it doesn't live up, and, you know, she's disappointed and all this kind of stuff, which means she was rooting for the other side. Let's just put that out there. But if she paid attention, those of us in the industry who actually understand this industry and don't say things like realtor, we said in the beginning this was fake news. We said in the beginning that this was not real, that the intended consequences were not going to be what they were. And now when that's actually played out by the people who actually understand the industry, she comes up with all these reasons of how more lawsuits are needed and how this is not, you know, how we're skirting the consequences and we're doing all this. She called it the great workaround about how we're not, you know, doing what we're supposed to be doing, those in the real estate industry. And I do want to say, by the way, there's over 1.5 million realtors. And by the way, it's not just realtors who follow these rules. Although realtors have to follow the settlement, the rules according to NAR settlement, most of the MLSs have adopted these rules, which means even if you are not a realtor, a dues-paying NAR member, most of your MLSs change the rules to abide by the settlement, which means even non-realtors are abiding by those rules under most situations. So you have millions of these people. Now, can you find examples of people not following the rules? Of course you can. You've got millions. When you have millions of people in a city, some people murder, some people steal. That doesn't mean that you talk about that city and its population and go, it's a bunch of murderers, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. You say that person goes to jail. And that's the part that I think she's missing, is that when you're so clouded, when you're so biased, you look for something to support your point of view, because really she's not looking for a story or the news or the truth. She's looking for views. And so that's what she's done on this. And so right off the bat, the reason why things didn't happen the way that you thought they would, Ms. Kamin, is because it was fake news from the beginning. It wasn't going to have that consequence to beginning. And we knew that. And by the way, we told you that. Okay, so don't be shocked when the people who knew the industry told you exactly what was going to happen, and it happened that way. Okay, she starts off by saying that the settlement, this was crazy to me. The settlement was supposed to lower prices across the country. That was the point of the settlement. And I'm listening to this going, are you out of your mind? Like, that was not the point of the settlement at all, okay? By the way, saying that it's supposed to lower prices lower is literally price fixing, which is what we got found guilty of. It's crazy how all these people do these things. And I was watching a thing the other day, and they were saying how a narcissist will accuse you of the things that they're guilty of. It's like, get there first. And I mean, my God, I feel like that's what happens over and over again right now in this industry, is you have these people who are accusing the industry of things that they're actually guilty of. And not to mention, the point of the settlement was not to lower prices. That was not the point. It was to bring transparency, which was also ridiculous, because there was always transparency. We always knew what was being paid. It was out there in the open. It was negotiable. It was, I mean, all of it. And the idea that people hired a buyer's agent and they didn't know what they were paying when that was coming out of the settlement. Guys, when you hire a travel agent, do you know what they're making from the hotel they booked for you? Do you know what the airline is giving them? Do you know what the resort is giving them? Like, these arguments are absurd, right? It's just they've looked at the real estate industry and went, we're going to come after you. And they make these arguments they're not applying to any other industry, and it just doesn't make sense, okay? She then says that the settlement was supposed to shake up the industry, that the price fixing that was occurring, where home sellers were being forced, I would love that word when they say that, they were being forced to pay the dreaded 6%. She actually said this, okay? The settlement was supposed to fix that. Guys, at the time of the settlement, even when the settlement began, 6% had not been a norm for over a decade. You know, in 2020 even, the average commission rate that was going out was right around 5.3. Previous to that, it even went down as low as 4.6, 4.7. But again, those are averages. There's no set thing. There's no there's no forcing that occurs. There's absolutely none of that. And she says that the 6% was the standard for years. Once again, coming from someone who says realtor, it shows that you do not know our industry, and that is not how it works at all, okay? And this is what happens when you allow people who don't believe in the free market to have a platform, okay? She does not believe in the free market. She continually talks about things that are completely anti-free market, and when the free market dictates what is actually available and what is being paid and what is, she doesn't like it because it's not her opinion. She thinks it should be forced, and that's why she likes a settlement, and that's why she likes things being litigated, because you always find with people who can't get their way in the open market, they want it litigated, because they're the kid who, when they were younger, were never told no, and they don't know how to be told no, and they don't know how to not get their way. So when the free market speaks, they go, it can't be right. That can't be the free market. We have to litigate this. And that's where someone like this is coming from, okay? There was never a fixed 6%. That's just not true. There has always been competing companies. There has always been, again, 1.5 million realtors, all competing, all not paying each other's bills, all willing to negotiate if they want to because they run their business. They're independent contractors. There was always the option of for sale by owner. There was always the free market, okay? It is what it is because of that free market. She talks about the monopoly of NAR. And look, guys, I've had my issues with NAR, you know that, but I'm also not somebody who just gets on one side and stays on that side. I listen to everything. And so she talks about the monopoly of NAR having over 1.5 million members. And she makes the point that there were more realtors than homes for sale. And then she talks about pricing being fixed and how commissions were inflated beyond what they should have been and what the market would bear. Now, guys, I'm going to just say this one more time. It's an open market with many options. Whatever was out there is what the market would bear. You may not agree with it. You may not like it, but that's what the market bared. If that's what it was, that's what the market bared, okay? She says 1.5 million members of NAR were all competing to provide for their families, and they were being forced by NAR to do what it is they did. And I would tell you, Ms. Kamin, that 1.5 million realtors all providing for their families is called competition, okay? It actually creates a system where people are paying exactly what the market will bear because these people are all competing with each other. This isn't one group where it's like they're all on the same. These are all competing people. And if you stepped into one real estate office in your life, you'd see that these people are competing with each other. They're independent contractors. These are not companies where you have an organization all trying to move, all people trying to move the organization together. They all eat what they hunt, every single one of them individually, okay? So your very argument about the 1.5 million members, it actually makes the opposite point because all of those people are competing with each other, which can drive prices down because all it takes is one person being willing to go lower and then the other person has to decide, do I go lower? Do I stay the same? Again, what will the market allow for? Okay, that's what it comes down to, okay? When someone's willing to sell your house for less, then that means that the other person doesn't get it or they go less, okay? That's what happens in a competitive industry, which is exactly what we have. It's an open market industry. She then goes on to say that the settlement allows for sellers to tell agents what they want to pay rather than it being fixed at 6%. Guys, I don't even know where to go with this. She keeps attributing to the settlement things that are not part of the settlement. Like, you are the reporter for the real estate division of the New York Times. Did you read the settlement? Like, where are you getting this info from? The settlement does not allow all of a sudden consumers to list what they're going to pay, and now realtors no longer get what it is that they were getting before. It's transparency. It's openly negotiable, as it's always been. A consumer can list what they're willing to pay, and then in an open market, an agent could say, yes, I'll do that, or no, I won't. Nothing changed after the settlement. It's that exact system. The only way that system changes is if we become some kind of dictatorship where you don't allow the open market, which it sounds like is what you actually want, okay? And so that is not what happened post-settlement. And again, I'm going to say it again. There's never been a fixed 6%, okay? That is the definition of price fixing. We don't have set percentages. Now, if you have individual agents who say this is what I charge and I won't go under that, that doesn't mean the industry is fixed at a percentage. That means an independent contractor knows what it is they're worth and says, that's what I get, and if you don't want to pay it, you'll work with someone else. No different than the attorneys who helped to sue the industry and said, this is what my hourly rate is. The people who are hiring them didn't say, well, I want this, and if you don't do that, then I'm suing you. They either went, hey, I'll pay that because that's what your individual rate is, or I won't, and I'll move on to someone else. The real estate industry is absolutely no different. This double standard of what you apply to the industry, but then you don't apply over to attorneys and other people is mind-numbing. Because if you work at the New York Times, you've got to be more intelligent than that to not see that that's exactly what you're doing, okay? So no, this 6% was not something that was fixed. It was never like that. And when I hear this, I literally, again, just ask the question, how does this lady have a job at the New York Times spewing this information? You're either lying, misinformed, or incompetent. because you can't be saying these things with an intelligent mind and actually believe them. They don't make sense, and the facts and the truth don't bear them out. The market is right in front of us. We can all see what happens. It's not some hidden thing. It's not. So when you say these things, you're either lying, you're misinformed, or you're incompetent. It's one of them. I'm not sure. I've got my guesses, but I'm not sure. I think you're just blindly biased. I think you're chasing views. I think you're chasing a story that you want to be true. And this may be your chance in your career because you have people like me and others that are saying your name, but it doesn't make it true, okay? And so none of that is true there. She then goes on to explain how reduced commissions were going to bring down house prices. This is such a dumb argument. Reduced commissions, and we said this in the beginning, by the way. When people like you were making the argument that reduced commissions, first off, who said reduced commissions? Not the point of the settlement. But again, even if there were reduced commissions, that doesn't lower house prices, okay? People don't make a price for a home and then add a commission on top of it, okay? The house sells for whatever the market dictates, and then the percentage comes off of that. It's chicken or the egg. And in this case, it's very clearly chicken, okay? Nobody, when making an offer, goes, okay, well, what's the percentage to the realtors? Not any buyer in the history of the world has determined what their offer is going to be based on what the commission that the seller is going to pay out. Not one seller has ever set their price based on that. They look at the market and what has sold and what the comparable properties are and what the market will dictate, and they come up with a price based on that. It is very clear that that's how it works. But people like you spew this stuff and make it sound like, well, lowered commissions means that means we're going to have lower prices. And then you're shocked when it doesn't work out that way. When all of us who actually know this industry and don't say things like realtor told you that's not how it was going to work out, okay? And not surprisingly, it didn't work out that way, okay? Because that doesn't make any sense. You can say it as much as you want. You can work wherever you want. It doesn't make it make sense, okay? That's not logical. Now, so she says how this was going to bring down because commissions were baked into the price of the home. And then, as I said, not surprisingly, that never happened, okay? And for you to fight that point even after it didn't work out is not journalism at all. It's just biased. You're not following the facts. You're following your feelings. You're following trying to be right. And that's not journalism at all. And that would be fine if you were just a normal podcaster, but you work at the New York Times. You're supposed to be actually practicing journalism, but I don't think anyone is surprised that that's just not the case, okay? She described our industry, and she called it the great real estate workaround, that we're all just working around the rules. And she said the settlement was designed to take away these conversations realtors were having about commissions on places like the MLS, okay? She says the settlement says that sellers pay their own agent and buyers pay their own agent. The settlement does not say that. That is literally a blatant lie. It's misinformed, blatant, or incompetence. It's just like that's not what the settlement says. She talks about in this podcast that broker-to-broker compensation, cooperative compensation, was eliminated by the settlement. That is not true on any level. And by the way, people like me, because of what's going on by attorneys in litigation, have said that cooperative compensation should go away, that there's a change in accounting. Seller pays the listing agent, seller pays the buying agent, but they ask for it separately. That's my personal opinion. Not that it should be like that, but because of litigation and people like you and attorneys who think like you, that's the way the industry should go. The settlement does not say that. So to go on a podcast as a journalist for the New York Times and say that that's what the settlement says, that's an outright lie, or you just didn't do your homework, okay? Because that's literally not what it says, okay? Hey everyone, I want to take a moment and talk to you about a really cool company called Privy. You know, if you were listening to this episode or even moving forward here, you're going to notice that I'm going to talk a lot about investors and how I think this is a huge part of the market that if you're growing a real estate business, we're not paying enough attention to. You know, I'm a big believer here that sometimes to grow your business, you don't just have to pick up a piece of the pie that's already there. Sometimes you have to go to a completely different pie. And it's so interesting because when you look at it, you look at all the data and you see that, you know, 26, 27%, almost 30% of all residential transactions in the last 12 months were investors, right? They were investors. And when I was an agent, like a ton of the business that I did were investors. And so a lot of you hear that and you're like, oh, it's institutional investors. Do you know institutional investors only make up about less than 3% of the overall market? And that's actually going down for the first time in years, which means that we have this huge number of people who are buying and selling properties all of the time, right under our nose, thousands of transactions. They're going to happen regardless. The only question is, are they happening with you? And that's the key thing that I want you to understand. And so when you look at Privy and what they do, they make you the go-to person to work with when it comes to finding investments, when it comes to finding out what a good deal is, when it comes to finding out what the right neighborhoods are, what the wrong neighborhoods are, what previous people had did, all at the touch of a button, right? And so all of a sudden, it's funny, I look at their stuff and I'm like, I worked with all these investors when I was selling real estate, and I'm like, how did I do this without this kind of a tool? And you don't have to do that. Now these kinds of tools are there. And so you're going to hear me in the future talking a lot about working with investors and what that looks like. And like I've said over and over again, it is my job to not only tell you what the problems are and what the solutions are, but ultimately to give you the tools that you need so that you can be the go-to source for something like that. And man, are these people worth a lot of money to you. So do yourself a favor, guys. Go to privy.pro. That's privy.pro. Amazing tool. You can ask us questions. There's more things even coming down the road with them that are just going to blow you away. But this is a tool you need in your business, especially for what it costs. It's not a cost, though. It's an investment, but it's well worth it. Let's start getting those investors. She says there's no more cooperative compensation. I talked about that. She then talks about stories of agents that leave 3 cookies on a plate to let the other side know they're offering 3%, or playing 3 Amigos on the TV at open houses and showings to let them know. Okay, so first off, again, the whole idea of 3 and 3, that hasn't been a reality in our industry for decades. So right away, that doesn't make sense. Number 2, have there ever been any agents since the settlement as a joke that have maybe put that out and talked about it with people? It's a joke, okay? It's not really what you as a reporter should be reporting on. And if there were people who were doing that, first off, it's not industry standard. It's not normal at all. There's millions of, realtors. I would know about it, by the way. Like, I'm in this industry. I talk to all these people. I see everything that's going on in the industry. And if there are people who are doing that, it's wrong, obviously. They shouldn't be doing that. But it doesn't make sense again, because that's not the average anyway. And if they did that, I did see things that happened after the settlement that were jokes, where people were doing those kind of things. They were creating some levity out of a situation that was really serious because their whole lives were just rocked. Their whole careers were just rocked. But the idea that that was like what people were doing, or that was, that's the norm or something like that, come on. Like that's not what was going on. And again, all you're doing right now is completely showing your bias. The interviewer goes on to talk about how there's data. The interviewer actually says to her, there's data that says that sellers who use an agent get significantly more money for their house than people who don't use an agent. Now, that's just data. And you'd think she'd take that and agree with that. But no. She says there's a lot of different factors that could create that. She doesn't accept that, on its face, that that's actually true. And then she goes on to say that maybe only people with money use realtors. And that's why, because they're higher priced, and that's why it gets more. This is the epitome of being biased. Even when you are presented with facts and the truth, you can't accept it because it doesn't fit your narrative, okay? And not to mention, how out of touch do you sound to think that only wealthy or luxury homeowners are using realtors? People who have trailers use realtors. People in mobile home parks use realtors. People with single-family homes use realtors. People with multifamilies use realtors. Like, how out of touch can you be? That is such a ridiculous statement to make, that only people with money use realtors, okay? We could do the whole show just on that, like the idea of that and just how out of touch someone who says something like that is, but I'm not going to do that, okay? The bottom line is every single point that is made is completely anti our industry. And I find myself the whole time going, how is this the person who's writing on behalf of real estate at the New York Times? Like, this would literally be like AOC heading up the fan club for Donald Trump. They hate each other. Like, why would she be the head of the fan club for Donald Trump? I'm pretty sure she'd have nothing good to say. But that's what it feels like when I read this stuff from this particular person. Why is she heading up the real estate industry at the New York Times when clearly she doesn't want the real estate industry to succeed, doesn't want the free market to happen, doesn't want any of these kinds of things? She goes on to say that that realtors don't act organically, that they're just following what NAR tells them to do because there aren't enough sales for the number of realtors in existence. Once again, completely false. Most realtors are either aren't full-time. Most of them aren't full-time. Redfin released a report recently that said 71% of realtors last year did not sell a single home. A lot of them have their license on the side because they have other jobs they're focused on. The reason why the majority of the sales that are happening in this country are done by a very small percentage of agents is because, number one, it's very difficult, and number two, it's because there's a very small percentage that are dedicated full-time to getting it done because it is a difficult full-time job. It requires you at all times to be available, to drop things that you're doing, to help people at times that aren't normal business hours, to do all of these things. And so again, you completely disregard that and think that all of these independent contractors are being run by NAR, which again, if you spent 3 seconds in our industry, you would realize what a dumb comment that is. That it makes no sense. That is you with your bias just trying to support what it is that you think or what it is you think should happen. She goes on to say that data coming out since the settlement has been ineffective in carrying out the settlement goals of lowering commissions and home prices. Again, the goal of the settlement was not to lower commissions and home prices. And by the way, if it was, then that should have been presented in the case and the jury should have known that, because clearly it wasn't about what they said it was about, which again, by the way, all of us knew the whole time. And we said it the whole time, and we got called like we were bad, we were greedy, we were, all of these things, and yet now you have people like her speaking openly and saying that's what it was about. It was about lowering things, lowering commissions, lowering prices, lowering all of these things. She goes on to say that with commissions not dropping, the American home seller, this is funny, okay, with commissions not dropping, the American home seller is not getting the desperate relief that they need at a time like right now. She doesn't even realize that she lost her own argument. She literally argued against her own argument. So with commissions not dropping, which was the goal of the settlement, nonsense again, home sellers are not getting the desperate relief that they need at a time right now, which was those lower percentages they pay out, right? What's interesting about that is that we completely ignore that realtors are Americans. So when you say, just 2 minutes earlier in the podcast, that there are more realtors than homes for sale, which means there are more realtors than home sellers, you then go on to make the point that the goal of the settlement to lower commissions, which was not the goal, that at a time right now when it didn't work out that way, those home sellers, which are Americans, are not getting the desperate relief that they need because things are so tough right now. But what you don't realize is you just made an argument against yourself. Because if there are more realtors than homeowners, for everything to work out the way that you want it, it means that commissions go down, which means the higher group, the higher number of people in a group, which is realtors, they are now going to collect less money because commissions have gone down, which means at the time, in your own words, that the American people need it so desperately, they're not getting the relief they need. You're saying take the larger group, which is realtors, 1.5 million plus other agents, and lower their commissions, which means at a time they so desperately need it, their income goes down. And now they can't afford things on the level that they need to in this desperate economy, in these desperate times. It makes absolutely no sense. You can't classify homeowners as the American people that need help and such a desperately need help at this time, and then say, but we're going to pull from the larger group, which is realtors. We're going to take their income down, and somehow they don't need help. They don't need to take care of themselves when they are by multiple times the larger group. That makes no sense. If we need relief, then you don't steal from the larger group's income. You don't lower their income. That makes no sense. But again, it's an example of your utter bias. It's an example of you not caring about the facts, about you just trying to make your argument for a story so that you can get views and hopefully make a name for yourself. That's all that's going on with this. Very interesting. She talked about dozens and dozens of sellers and buyers that are completely frustrated by how aggressive agents are not following the new rules. Okay. First off, you don't even understand the new rules. So how are you telling us what rules are being followed and not? Because you did nothing but make several inaccurate statements about what the rules are, okay? So let's just get that out of the way. She says that some sellers are so frustrated they're deciding to go it alone and skip the whole process. That's always been allowed. That's, again, what's called the free market. They always could have skipped the whole process. But again, look at the data. Home sellers that don't use an agent don't get as much money. That's why almost 90% of people use an agent when buying and selling a home. But the option you're now saying that they can go to because of post-settlement, all of these new rules, it's been available the whole time. This is not something new. Again, it is called the free market, okay? It says that these types of well, here's the point I want to make with this. She goes on to talk about these dozens and dozens of sellers and these people she's talked to. This isn't like data. This isn't like whatever. These are sellers that she's talked to. Now, I promise you she is not talking about sellers who didn't prove her point. She's only using those. This is what's called anecdotal evidence. Why is a reporter for the New York Times using anecdotal evidence? That is called feelings. That has nothing to do with the truth, and you can find in any different place people with anecdotal evidence, right? You could find that our country's racist because all I got to do is go find 12 people who go, I don't like this people. I don't like these kind of people. I don't like what I can find anybody who says anything. That doesn't stand up. That's anecdotal. And somebody who calls himself a journalist and reporter should absolutely understand that, okay? Just more nonsense arguments, okay? She then... Hey guys, I want to talk to you about an amazing real estate tool right now called Mosaik. You know, if you want to take your people off of the portals where they're all hanging out and whatever and into your ecosystem, this is the tool that does that. You know, this is a beginning to end, not a CR, it's not another CRM, it doesn't replace that, but it's a beginning to end system that really looks at the lifetime value of your client and looks at every part of that process and takes care of all of it in a way that's completely transparent. So yes, they've got search, they've got transaction coordination, they've got, even for us when we do things like we teach our students the Core 100. They've got the ability to put those people in there, track what's happening, do all of that in an amazing way. But probably the thing that I love about this more than anything is the transparency. You know, in an industry that keeps talking about transparency, and usually when you hear something over and over again, it means that it's not being done at all. This is actually a transparent tool. This is the first tool that I've seen that actually brings the consumer into the transaction. And I think that is the next level of where we are going within this industry. You know, you hear from so many buyers and sellers that, oh, my agent didn't do anything, or I feel like they're not, and there's not this communication going on. This is the first tool I've seen, almost like the early days of .loop where you had that collaboration, but it was just for the document and the signature. They can do that with the transaction now, not only with the clients, but with the vendors, whoever it is, in an amazing way where they can see every step of what's going on. You can write notes to them back and forth. They can see every part of the paperwork and everything and the way that you decide to show it. It's really the next level of what we need to be doing from a consumer experience perspective, so they know what's happening, and more importantly, we drive that lifetime value back to you. So if you haven't yet, guys, this is a tool you're going to hear over and over again. You're going to hear me talk about it because I really think it's my role to not just define what the problems or solutions are, but provide the tools that will actually get you there. And while so many tools right now are just check the box and just say you have them, this is one yourself, your team, your brokerage. If you're not on it yet, you need to be. This is not the last you're going to hear about this. They're going to grow astronomically, and this is something you need to get on board with if you're going to operate. If you're going to be one of those people that really overcomes and is that top producer in your area, you've got to have the right tools in place, and Mosaik is one of those right now. So do yourself a favor. Go check out mosaik.io, mosaik.io. Again, mosaik.io. You won't regret it, guys. Send us questions if you do, but this is one of those ones that you're going to look back on and remember, amazing tool. Talks about the account on Instagram, which I've covered. I did a video about. The Realtors Hate Me account. And she talks about what he's trying to do, and then she laughs and chuckles at the idea of his name on there, his username, Realtors Hate Me. And I couldn't help when I heard that but think to myself, if we created an account called Sellers Hate Me, what would your response be? Do you think you'd be chuckling? Do you think it would be funny? Do you think that, like, you're the definition of discrimination? You stand over here and you talk about fairness and this, but really you're against the other side. You're against the real estate industry, the very industry that you write for at the New York Times, okay? And by the way, if we put out a Sellers Hate Me, you'd be calling for a lawsuit and saying how wrong that is, and you would not find it funny at all, I promise you. All you're looking for is evidence to back up your opinion. Again, not research, not journalism, it's just your opinion. It's biased opinion. So she uses Mike Chambers, who's the owner of the Realtors Hate Me account, and she says that he interviewed many agents, it was 4, and nobody was willing to go below 5%. And his house is probably worth $2.75 million, which is way too much money for a realtor to make. Now, first off, let's just talk about this. Nobody was willing to go under 5%. Realtors have a right in a negotiation to say that they won't do something. Again, that is also the free market. They say, this is what I charge, this is what it is, I'm not going below that. They absolutely have every right to do that. That is called the free market, okay? He could have found someone else. Guys, I looked it up. In his area, there are companies that do it for 1%. He could have easily done that. No settlement needed, no anything. It was available. Again, called the free market, okay? She goes on and says, when she talks about the 5%, this is what's interesting. Nobody was willing to go under 5%. And when I heard that, the first thing that came into my mind was, I thought the 6% was fixed. So now we're down to 5, and now we're like, wait a second, I thought the 6. So the arguments keep on changing as you're going along. It was 6, but now they wouldn't go below 5. Well, then 6 isn't fixed, okay? Fixed means something. Words mean something. Fixed means it doesn't change. It won't change. So when you say the whole industry is fixed at 6, but then you say somebody wouldn't go below 5, that means 6 wasn't fixed, okay? And when I look up on Google and find a company that will do it for 1 in his area, 6 wasn't fixed, okay? Again, called the free market, okay? But the idea that she was upset about an agent making more on a $2.75 million home is absolutely funny to me. As if selling an almost $3 million property should not make you more money. And my question to her, this reporter, Ms. Kamin from the New York Times, is if she's taking a higher salary for working at the New York Times. You're doing the exact same work. You're probably putting in the exact same hours. In fact, you're probably putting in less hours than when you first started. You probably first started at some local paper or local news network or something like that, making almost nothing. And now you take a job at the New York Times where you most likely make way more money than you did in the beginning because you're at the New York Times. You're at the big time. And then you criticize people who, in the equivalent of the real estate industry, go to sell a $3 million property and make more money selling a $3 million property than they do selling a $300,000 property. And that is awfully convenient for you to have that point of view about them while you collect a check that I guarantee you is more than your first job at a lower level place that doesn't have the same eyeballs, that doesn't have the same views, that doesn't have the same cachet, that doesn't have all of these kinds of things. It's interesting how that works in your favor, and you criticize it while you are doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, okay? The truth of the matter is that when an agent sells a property for $3 million, they make more money than when they sell a house for $300,000. That's how it works, okay? Next up, she says that Mike Chambers goes on to say, she actually goes into an interview that was done with Mike Chambers, and he goes on to say that he worked hard for his money and he doesn't want to just light his money on fire, because that's what it's called when you hire an agent. And statistically, they make more money than if you didn't hire an agent. It's burning your money on fire. Burning your money on fire, by the way, would be not hiring an agent and making less. That'd be burning your money on fire. And he goes on to say, doesn't want to light his money on fire because there's a system forcing him to do so. I think that we need to get back to what forcing is. Nobody is forcing you. The fact that you made an account and went for sale by owner meant that you weren't forced. It meant that you had options. It meant that you had free market. It could mean that you didn't like the other option, but that's why you get to choose the one you did, because it's not forced. Forced would mean that you couldn't do the other thing, okay? Mike Chambers was frustrated because he didn't want to pay a realtor, but he also wants his house on the MLS and couldn't believe he couldn't just put it on the MLS himself. And like I have said many times, you cannot put up a yard sale in your driveway and then get upset that you don't have the distribution of Home Depot. You don't get the systems. You don't get the network. You don't get the technologies. You don't get all of these kinds of things of hiring a professional realtor when you don't hire a professional realtor. You don't get the distribution of Home Depot or Lowe's or Walmart when you put up a yard sale in your front yard. That is not how it works. You have the freedom to do it, but you can't get upset when you don't get to use their systems, their processes, their network, all of those kind of things. You can't get upset when at the end of the day that happens, okay? I can't get upset if I drive an Uber across the country and then I just randomly go to the airport and Delta won't let me into their lounge. You getting upset about not being allowed into the Realtors MLS, the professional network Realtors MLS that they pay to be a part of, you being upset about not being able to be in there is like driving your car across the country and then being upset that Delta doesn't let you into their Delta lounge. You're not with Delta. You're not with the realtors. You don't get their MLS. And to think differently is entitlement, okay? You have the choice, you have the freedom to do whatever it is that you want to do. But every single choice that you make comes with an invoice, okay? Every choice has an invoice. If you choose to not work with realtors, you don't get the realtors network. You don't get the realtors software. You don't get the realtors technology. You don't get you don't get any of it. That's how it works. If you don't fly Delta, you don't get to hang in their lounge. That's how it works. Now, she says that buyer agents wouldn't show Mike's house because he was working against the system. And I'm going to tell you right now that if there were buyer agents that were doing that, that's wrong. Do I think there were buyer agents that were doing that in an industry with millions of realtors? Probably. I don't think that's an issue with the system. I don't think that's an issue with the industry. That's an issue with those people. And if they were doing that, as I said, I think that is completely wrong. Every industry has their bad apples, just like every journalism industry has their Debra Kamins. Okay? They're not after the truth. They're after their own opinions. They're after biases. That doesn't mean that all of journalism is broken. It means you have somebody who doesn't understand an industry but is trying to describe it. Okay? Real estate's got bad apples too. That does not define the whole industry. There are way more good ones than bad ones. It's impossible to get millions of people all on the same page. If there were realtors who were refusing to show, which there probably were, they're wrong. We're not allowed to do that, okay? That's called steering, and we don't agree with that, and the overall industry doesn't agree with that. Don't look for them and then go, this is the industry. That is not the case. No different than you don't find somebody in humanity who goes and robs somebody or goes and beats someone up and goes, this is humanity. No, it's not. That's a bad person. It does not define humanity. Now, she ends by saying that this was amazing. She goes on and tells this story about how unfair the industry is and how people just don't understand, and how when she sold her house, she didn't even think to ask the agent what percentage she was paying. And she can't imagine other people going through if she didn't think of it, and people must be getting taken advantage of. And I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm going, what? You work in the real estate division of the New York Times, and when you went and sold your house, you didn't even think to ask what the percentage was going to be? Now I'm really questioning your intelligence, because that makes no sense to me at all. Like, at all. And here you are lecturing the industry, and you didn't even ask what the percentage was for you? That tells me everything I need to know about your knowledge base and whether you should be leading the attack on this industry. Again, you clearly don't understand the industry, and you clearly couldn't even find out for yourself what your percentage was, and now you're telling us what we're doing in regards to our percentage with people. You couldn't even figure it out for yourself, okay? I cannot believe you told that story. To me, that's like credibility gone. Like that's not an intelligent thing to be telling people, okay? She goes on and she talks about an interview she did where she interviewed Michael Ketchmark post-settlement and how it wasn't having the intended consequences that they wanted. Not that it was supposed to have, but that they wanted. And this is so interesting because Ketchmark responds and he says, you know, Blockbuster didn't shut down all of their stores overnight when things started streaming. He says it took time. And I think that statement tells you everything about what their motive is here. Their motive is not about consumers. Their motive is not about doing what's best. Their motive is not about transparency. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about completely disrupting the industry and getting rid of realtors. That's it. You don't give an example about Blockbuster shutting down in regards to the realtors and the people in our industry unless that's exactly what you want for them. And it shows you that they're sitting back going, it's going to happen eventually. It's going to be a slow thing. But that is the stated goal. There's no more guessing here. There's no more wondering what they want. They're literally outwardly and publicly telling you exactly what they want to have happen, and I think it's disgusting. And I think at some point here, when we start looking at our judicial system and these lawsuits and all these other kind of things, at some point, judges and juries and everybody else have got to start paying attention to this nonsense that's being spewed and understand, like I said earlier in this podcast, that these are everyday Americans too. People who are selling real estate are everyday Americans. The only difference is they don't have cushy salaries. They don't have guaranteed benefits. They don't have any of that stuff. They eat what they hunt. Every day they go to work and they don't know what's going to happen. Every time they close on a transaction, they don't know if another one's coming about or how long it's going to take. Every day, every month, when their mortgage payment comes in, when their rent payment comes in, when their car payment comes in, they don't know if there's a correlating or a check coming in at the same time to pay that, okay? And so attacking these people, especially with inaccuracies and your stated view that you want to eliminate them, is utterly disgusting. And at some point, all of the people, the judges, the juries, these people have got to start paying attention to not what these people are insinuating, but what they're saying publicly. And that is what I feel about this. And I hope this helps a lot of you. I think, you should go give it a listen for yourself so you can know that I'm not overstating these things, because these are absolutely what they're saying. And again, for the life of me, I can't understand how she still has a job as a journalist. If you want to be a podcaster, go for it. But as a journalist, come on. There's nothing journalistic about what she's doing.